So welcome back to Restless. You've joined myself, Paul, and Joe, who's coming at us from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. As together we, young adult Catholics, restlessly seek the face of Christ in today's crazy mixed-up world. And one of the things that's pretty crazy at this time of year is the upcoming presidential election. Although we must not forget that there are other seats up for election other than president. So a lot of people focus on, Trump versus Kamala, but there's obviously more to it than that. But I think in a special way, this election's been really challenging for Catholics because it seems as if, especially as a Catholic who's been voting since 2000, it's my first election.
Yeah, young adult.
I guess podcast. I'm not young. Yeah, sorry. 2000 was my first election.
Did you vote for Nixon?
No.
Or
I'm sorry.
Did you vote? Or did you...
I'm sorry, 2004.
No,
2004 was my first one.
Kennedy or Nixon? Who was your...
Yeah. Nixon, man, Nixon.
Yeah.
But no, I'm sorry, it's 2004. But since that time, there's always been kind of a clear pro-life candidate and not pro-life candidate, pro-choice candidate, right? Maybe somewhat stronger, somewhat weaker, etc. And one can argue, the pro-life stance of George W. Bush, George H.W., whatever, John Kerry, whoever it was, pull up whoever you want. But this one seems to be particularly challenging in that it seems that both candidates are not fully committed pro-life. And I know a lot of people take me to task on that because they're like, no, Trump is pro-life. But Joe, you have done some research.
Trump is not pro-life, and it was never really a plausible case that he was pro-life, frankly, in my opinion. This will be my last appearance on Restless, by the way, after all the fans get back to us. It was never a good thing to believe, right? It was clear that he was only speaking pro-life as a second language, right? He had no history of this, and I don't know about you guys, but I've changed my opinions on big things in the course of my life, and I could always tell you why and how, and he was never able to offer an explanation for that because it was never true.
He did come out in the late 90s on some TV show saying he was very pro-choice, and
and it's just obvious. I mean, like, whatever. But so it's worth just going down a couple points right here. First, if you were to Google the GOP platform, such as it exists, it says almost nothing about abortion. What it says is limiting late-term abortions and basically leaving it up to the states to decide what they want to do. That's not particularly pro-life. It also, parenthetically, supports expanding access to birth control and IVF. So that's not great.
Right.
Trump he's muddied the water on this, but he's essentially come out and supported methylprednisolone, which is a drug which is used for chemical abortions. Chemical abortions,
they make it more than 50%, right?
Yeah, it's 60%. Yeah, I believe it's 60% of abortions. So he advocated against the Florida 6-week abortion ban. He's all over the place because he doesn't really believe anything. But what he certainly doesn't believe is that abortion is a moral evil. Now you can say, and people will say, oh, well, but the judges, but look at Roe v. Wade. And I think it's just worth noting that he does not know anything about those three Supreme Court justices whom he nominated. They were given to him by the head of the Federalist Society, and that's great. He accepted them. He has since expressed his regret for those decisions because they didn't vote his way in other cases, which we should talk about because I think there's other moral issues at play here. But he's expressed his regret at appointing them, nominating them. There's no evidence that he would do likewise in the future. It's also worth saying that Roe v. Wade is overturned, so there's nothing he's going to do. So even if he wasn't pro-choice, which he is, I don't think we can pretend this election is about abortion, because ultimately, regardless of who wins presidency, probably there will be the same number of abortions, because ultimately the president has nothing to do with this. There's not going to be a national ban, and Trump has said he's against it.
Definitely a national ban.
Pretty sure Trump would veto it. It's just worth saying.
And that is true. But Kamala wants to enshrine it in law that abortion rights are, go through, instead of the judicial branch going through the executive and the legislative branch.
Okay, but I think it's worth just establishing the field of play here. So is the only question selection abortion? I think if that's the case, we're in serious trouble. I don't think that's the only thing we should be thinking about. If it is all we're thinking about, I'm prepared to argue that voting for Trump still makes no sense over Kamala.
That I would agree.
But I mean, frankly, do we actually think abortion is going to be enshrined into law? I mean, is that actually something we think is going to happen nationally? I mean, which Republicans are voting for that?
I believe a large number.
Yeah, so maybe a couple of things. So I think that So I think Roe v. Wade was an interesting situation we had in this country for all the years that it was, decades and decades, because it actually allowed Republicans to actually hide behind it.
Yeah.
And I think we probably said something like this when the Roe v. Wade decision. We had a podcast when Roe was overturned.
Right.
I think we all can
show,
agree
yeah.
that was probably. I mean, abortion clinics have been shut down from that Supreme Court, the Dobbs decision. Now, whether or not now there's kind of more prevalence of using the pill and things like that. But besides the
traveling
point,
across state lines is worth noting. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
still numbers wise, I mean, every human life is valuable, and so if it saves one life, 10 lives, okay, it may not save 100,000, but
yeah. So I think the other thing to note is that so it allowed Republicans to actually hide behind it because they say, well, I'm very pro-life, I'm for national ban of abortion, but we have this thing Roe v. Wade, which is in effect that essentially makes it impossible for us to do anything on the federal level. I think that states had different laws beyond kind of what Roe v. Wade allowed for. There were states that had different bans at different weeks and things like that. So states did have a little bit of say over it. But in the end of the day, there was abortion clinics throughout this country. And then once Roe v. Wade was rolled back, you had this situation where Republicans actually could do something about it in their states at a state level or even at the federal level, where you now can have Congress can pass a law or a constitutional amendment such that you could ban abortion throughout the country. And now kind of the chickens come home to roost. And a lot of those Republicans in more moderate districts have had to actually change their stance. So it's, Trump's an interesting character. I mean, Trump will say Trump wants to get elected. And I think a lot of politicians, so I think you could pick apart, I think Trump in particular, you can pick this apart. So I'm not negotiating that, but I would say that with any politician, what they actually believe versus what they say they believe, there might be some dissonance there. And so we have to accept that with all politicians, but I would say Trump, maybe it's more because he is trying to get elected. And I think that he knows that this topic is not, unfortunately for the pro-life cause, is not a 50-50 topic anymore across the country. It's starting to swing more pro-choice, unfortunately.
Which is odd because I think if you look at surveys, most surveys are the same or perhaps slightly improved in terms of the pro-life cause. But
it depends on how the questions are asked.
That's true too.
It's you can get wildly different results with small nuances in the questions. So I mean, you could read a Pew Research poll or a Gallup poll or a generic poll, and you'll get 3 completely different answers based on who they interview and what they precisely ask.
Yeah, that's true. So, I mean, are we really getting more pro-choice as a nation? I don't know. I hope not.
Well, I think that there's just to some extent, I think I would say that my gut intuition is, and I don't have any facts, but Joe's got like a document or something he's looking at, so he can like correct me. But I think that when you start talking about abortion, not the chemical abortion, right? Which is still abortion, by the way, using abortifacients and things. I think that when you start talking about actually like the killing of the baby in the womb, when it's like essentially when it looks like a baby,
yeah,
when you can actually do an ultrasound, and not that that's any more of a life than a fetus. But when you start talking about that, I think that there has been a bit of a shift there. Now, those people might say, well, just use the pill earlier on.
Yeah,
but there might be a shift there, which is good. The end result might not be good, but at least that is good.
This past weekend, I gave a homily where for the first time in my priesthood, I mentioned IVF because it was very much in line with the readings and everything. And much to my surprise, I didn't get negative feedback per se, but there was one particular person I was talking to about my homily afterwards. And I was like, yeah, I was really kind of going out on a limb there with IVF. And she said, I didn't even consider that it was a moral issue. Like, It's become such a part of our culture that it's not, like, it doesn't even cross people's minds that this could even potentially be wrong.
Right.
And I think that's the same way, especially with the abortion pill, right? People are just like, well, it's just medication. It's just a pill that I take. There's no like, and of course, I think unfortunately the pro-choice people have done such a phenomenal job in a negative way in shaping all of the arguments just based on the woman's rights, women's health. Like they don't even try to pretend like this is not a life.
Yeah, it's the same thing, and abortion is one thing. It's also the same with euthanasia, especially what's happened in Canada, where it's just care.
It's
Euthanasia
care,
is just
right.
it's just care.
This is just
You know,
a
medically
medical
assisted dying.
necessity. And of course, that does demonize pro-lifers. Is why are you denying medical care to someone? I mean, that seems cruel. So what do we do? So what do we do in this particular election if this is seems like almost a lost cause almost?
Well, I think we accept that the presidential election is not about abortion this time around, at least, and is not going to affect it almost at all. It's my view, and it also happens to be the truth, that it's a fantasy. It's a fantasy that Kamala Harris is going to somehow pass some sort of national enshrinement of abortion. Total fantasy. She's not getting the votes. I mean, you would need that would be filibustered. You would need 60 senators. You're not getting it. You're not getting what you need. You're not getting through the House. It's just not gonna happen. So I think that if we posit that as our explanation, really a justification for why we're voting for Trump, then what we're doing is we're saying I feel more comfortable voting for Trump than not voting, or than voting for Kamala, or than voting for a third party, and therefore I need to find a justification. And here it is. But I think if we want to engage in a serious examination of what a Catholic is to do in this election, we need to first say, okay, abortion, they're essentially the same. And insofar as they both are essentially pro-choice, and they said both essentially won't affect abortions, put it to the side, and then start to ask the really hard question, which is, well, what sort of candidate is worthy of my vote as a Catholic? Like, I what does my vote actually mean? What does it mean to vote for somebody? Is choosing between the lesser of two evils really all that it is? Is my vote for somebody a declaration of affirmative support for them? What other issues are at play? Leaving it. And by the way, just parenthetically again, President pro-life. How many people were executed during the Trump administration? It's just worth tossing out there. I mean, it's not zero. Yeah, I mean, I'd have to look it up, but he.
But how many were executed during Obama? How many? I mean, like it's not like
significantly fewer. Significantly fewer. Yeah.
Perhaps.
But either way, again, I think we just need to put the abortion thing to the side for just a second here, because I think there are other questions worth asking about these two people.
Okay. So like what?
Okay. Well, so which one respects the dignity of the human person as regards immigration, for example? Which one has, and by the way, it's possible that neither of them check these boxes, but which of any have demonstrated any amount of devotion to the truth, have demonstrated any amount of desire to inculcate a culture of charity, which of any?
Yeah, I would say probably neither of them for all
Right,
of these,
okay, so-
to be honest. I mean,
Right. Okay.
because
but so again, yeah.
such things as immigration policy, there's in this issue, although perhaps a candidate or a person might have the good interest of welcoming the stranger, which is a gospel command that we ought to do, but we can have very different views on how to go about doing that. So to say that we should not have open borders is not necessarily not welcoming, because there could be more to it than that. It's a much more nuanced position, unlike the pro-life position where it's like, okay, abortion is wrong, period, in every case. So.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I would just say that while I think Harris has done her best to distance herself from the open borders thing, it's just worth saying that a posture of the United States government which says, come one, come all, just walk across the border and we'll take care of you, leads to an increase in illegal immigration, which is a humanitarian disaster for the actual illegal immigrants. So it's not the compassionate policy to say come one, come all, because it's also not true.
Right.
Right.
And we see the other effects with the increase in fentanyl deaths and human trafficking and all the other aspects. So it's a lot more complicated than just a simple soundbite.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that there's, I think the United States does have a pretty generous. The system itself, the way it administers it, is absurd and terrible and slow and terrible, but it's the only word I have.
And terrible?
And terrible, yeah. But
Agreed.
We do have a pretty generous policy with regards to asylum. And so I've always looked at this topic, putting the candidates aside for a second, but I've always looked at the topic of immigration as, well, United States does, to be a charitable country, I don't have any particular issue taking in folks that are seeking asylum, that are truly coming from terrible areas that are war-torn or going through famine or both, or, just generally poorly managed and poor, where folks can't even get food or water. So I have no fundamental problem with that. I think that the fundamental problem is that the system that we have set up right now is unable to actually handle the degree to which these folks need to be processed. And the way that they're processed and the way that they actually come into the country is ridiculous, where they, a lot of these people, they get brought in by cartels and they pay thousands of dollars to have cartels bring them across the border. And then they actually go find an ICE officer and turn themselves in and say, I claim asylum. It's like, that's the system we have right now.
Yeah.
It's an absurd system. First of all, it's dangerous, and you're paying the cartels to do this, who are way more powerful than they should be. Basically, they're pseudo governments, and so there's this whole line of issues with immigration, and frankly, both parties haven't done really anything about it in the past. It was like 1986, 1996, 2006. There was big pushes for immigration. It was the sixes, and then nothing happened. There's been fits and starts. You have Obama did different things, which is more detention. You had Trump, which closed the border completely, sort of, and said
sort
remain,
of, but
and,
not really.
And the remain in Mexico
But
actually
no.
did reduce the amount of immigrants coming across. That is true. And so you had that, but then Mexico gets upset because then you have all these people coming from Central America. Like, it's a mess. So
I do think the U.S. bishops protested the Remain Mexico policy, although that's not morally binding. Obviously, it's a prudential judgment, but yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know what the right, it's one of those situations with immigration that you have a lot of lives at stake, and you have a lot of room for abuse, and you have a lot of bureaucracy that gets in the middle. And so how you solve that is
But
it's impossible.
practically for us and for Catholics, though, I think you have a common sense, plan. But the problem is we don't have either of the major candidates endorsing such a common sense plan, and
Right.
and it's a lot of rhetoric, and not a whole lot of common sense.
Right.
So
Yeah. That's one thing. I think the other issue right now is I'm actually quite concerned. I mean, right now, right now in the world, we have absolutely a terrible kind of global economic situation right now. It's very fragile, and I'm actually very concerned about that. I think there's a lot of lives at stake. When we talk about life and the value of a life, I think there's a lot of lives at stake. When you think about the war in Ukraine, which, in February 24th will be the 3rd year anniversary of the war, which is just in a few months. You have what's going on in Israel and the Middle East generally. There's a lot of interwoven connections among the countries that are at play between those two conflicts in terms of, especially Russia, that is quite concerning. And, the fact that there could be a situation where, a nuclear weapon is used is it feels closer now. It feels similar to probably what it felt like. Not that I was alive, father was, but back in in the early 1960s when we were at the Cuban Missile Crisis. We're not quite there yet, thankfully, but you could see a situation where we get there, and it could happen within the course of 5 days.
it could.
And so I'm particularly concerned about that right now, as it relates to this particular election.
Yeah, I share your concern. I do. I don't know how I'm saying it so slowly. I share your concern, but I don't I'm trying to figure out which of these candidates is even remotely equipped to handle it or even understand what the conflict is about. I mean, yeah, I would just say that it's worth taking a step back and trying to think through for a moment, okay, what does it mean to vote for somebody? Because, we had a little email exchange about this episode. And Diane pointed out some statements by Pope Pius XII and some sections of the Catechism which seem to indicate that there is some amount of an obligation for Catholics to vote. I think it's obvious that doesn't mean in every single election, at every level of government, is an absolute moral obligation to vote for
We could
mayor,
vote for
but
senators and our town council.
right. And so I think it's worth saying, okay, we have, as a country, largely decided that what it means to vote is to choose either the Democrat or a Republican. And certainly in practical terms, one of them is going to be the next president. However, it is my thesis that deciding prior to the election that you have to vote for one of the two candidates that the parties spit out gives the parties far too much power. And I think we'd be in a better position as a country if, rather than saying, I will choose one of these two evils, whichever one I think is lesser, if rather than doing that, we were all to say, I will vote for a candidate who meets some baseline requirements, we'd be much better off. And so just me personally, the way I navigate this, for those who care, which is nobody, but that's fine.
I care, Joe. I care.
Thank you, Paul.
You're
I
welcome.
don't vote for people because I feel like I have to vote for people because I choose to. If I'm casting if I'm casting a vote for your name, it's because I have some modicum of confidence that you'll do something good and you won't do some awful things. You're not an awful person and that you're not to
Yeah.
be dishonest and immoral. And before you write in saying, "Oh, they're all like that," they're not all like that. I'm sorry, they just aren't. There are some that are worse than others. So, and for that reason, I can't see my way forward voting for either of these two major candidates.
But I think it's a lie that those are the only two candidates out there. And you know, we have kind of a particular
Right.
pleasure and joy in Connecticut. The fact that Connecticut always goes Democratic. We're not even a battleground
Yes.
state. No one ever comes and stumps here. I mean, it's just like we're ignored.
Nope. I could
And-
vote in Pennsylvania. I'm choosing not to because I don't. Because Connecticut's
Oh.
a much more pleasant voting environment.
Well, it's
in some
your
ways,
home,
not
yeah.
others.
But I think that's a gift for me at least because I do have a sense in which I have the freedom to not feel like, well, I have to vote to keep somebody out of office, right? So now I can vote for the one that I really like, and I've very much fallen in love with the American Solidarity Party, which has a truly Catholic platform. You know, it's a third party, very small, but it continues to increase. And the platform is both pro-life and pro-family, but also pro-environments and having common sense, views on the economy. And you know, it's really, I think, what
Did they have a petitioning candidate for this election?
they do.
I got
They
my
do,
absentee
yeah.
ballot in the mail yesterday. I'm going to be.
Who is it? Who's the?
I don't.
Who's the
I
Solidarity
didn't
Party?
I didn't see that party. I
It-
saw.
well, maybe you're right, and I'm not sure.
Yeah,
Let
I'm
me
not
check it
sure.
out.
Yeah, I saw Democratic Party. They might get upset. They have the Republican Party, the Green Party, and Libertarian Party, and then they had a petitioning candidate of Kennedy Jr., which I don't think he's running anymore, but he's still on the ballot because he was already on the ballot.
So yeah, so they're
Kennedy Jr. endorsed Trump. He's not running.
their candidates are Peter Sonsky and Lauren Onak. But you're right; they're probably not
Sweet.
listed, so you have to probably do
Yeah.
a write-in vote.
Right.
And it's
But-
also the same thing as not voting. I mean,
Right.
just in terms of practical effect, which is beyond. Like it may not be
Practical
morally the same,
effect,
like, I'd say
yes.
it's not morally the
However,
same, but if,
two things.
yeah.
First of all, if it is a moral obligation for me to vote and to put in, then
Yeah.
I'm taking care of my moral obligation.
Yeah,
But I think
agree
it's
with
I
that.
think it's important for us, just as a country, to send a message to our leaders that we're fed up with this two-party system, and if enough people do it, I don't know what's going to happen. But this is my ultimate kind of backup thing, right? So if Trump has kind of abandoned the pro-life position for whatever reason, maybe he never believed in it. Maybe I heard Melania came out recently that she's a supporter of
Melania. Yeah.
yeah, whatever, you know. She's a supporter of abortion rights, et cetera. So I don't know if it's her influence, and she's apparently a Catholic, quote unquote, whatever. But I would like to send a message, and I don't even mind if the Republicans don't win, because I want to send a message to Trump and the other Republicans that we pro-lifers are not a guaranteed Republican vote if you're not going to be
Right.
pro-life for us.
This has been so bad for the pro-life movement that it's become coterminous with the Republican Party. The Republican Party, as it stands right now, is not a fully pro-life party. Even before, Trump, even when Trump was allegedly pro-life, again, he executed 13 people during his administration, and various other policies that I think we could say are not pro-life. So yeah, the wedding of the pro-life movement, Republican Party is very, very, very bad. And for the pro-life movement's sake, it needs to be decoupled from the Republican Party. And I think, Father, you're exactly right. It needs to be known that you can't count on the votes of these people.
Now, with
Plus,
that said, you brought up twice the capital punishment issue, which I agree. As a civilized nation, we should not in any way, shape, or form have capital punishment. But 13 people who are guilty of a crime is quite different than the million-plus innocent babies that are killed in abortion. So I don't think
totally
in
agree with
any
you.
way, shape, or form those are equal issues in
No,
any
I totally agree
election
with you. I
whatsoever.
totally agree with you. Although it's worth, I totally agree with you. Although it's worth saying that the president can stop all federal executions himself or
That's true.
herself without
That's
anybody
true.
else.
And someone
So-
who's truly pro-life
Yeah.
would do that.
Right.
But
I'm
you
just,
won't get that
again, I'm
until-
not saying that they're not morally equivalent. I just think it's worth
No,
it's
I
also
agree.
like,
It is
there's all these
a
other things,
factor, but it's like a 1% factor versus 50% factor. So
Yeah, I
Sure.
guess one
Yeah.
one thing that I've been kind of thinking about quite a bit, especially in this election, is that I think I would say the conservative movement generally, which you could say, which for me at least, the way I think about it is that I think would include the ideas around pro-life issues, abortion and euthanasia and all the others. So that's kind of how I think about it, because of trying to conserve what we believe in, right? And so you're trying to conserve, and that's like the idea that a life is precious and valuable is something that we ought to conserve. It's something that's we ought to promote that idea. That's not like a progressive or a liberal idea, right? And so, but I'm afraid that as we continue to go through the years, and I think we do have an obligation to change hearts and minds. Unfortunately, the party, any party, it doesn't seem like we'll be able to run on a platform of pro-life, probably forever. And so if you say like, well, if we decouple so let me just finish the point. So if we decouple the Republican Party from the pro-life movement, right? Well, then it just drops from the platform completely.
See, I disagree, and here's why I disagree, because I think the pro-life this fight over abortion has been won not by politics but by the media.
Oh,
the media's shaping
sure.
of the narrative, as in terms of just women's rights. Who wants to take away rights, right? Rights, that idea of rights is something that's so imbued in what it means to be American that to take away rights seems like this horrific thing. So the issue is not the political thing. It's who's going to win the media narrative
Right.
about this.
Yeah.
Because if you portray it as, okay, we're serving the most vulnerable in taking care of the unborn. We have, goodness gracious, it's been pro-lifers who run these beautiful clinics for women that are struggling, and homes for the abused women and women and children. I mean, the Sisters of Life and all the things that we do, the Birthright and Hope Line and all these great organizations. If we win that narrative, I believe the entire country will come along.
Oh, absolutely.
But we have to win that narrative, and that's almost impossible when you have CNN and NBC being the main narrative that people listen to.
Right. Yeah, and I think, and when we talk about, so that's where like that's where politics, that's where when we start talking about these issues with politics, it becomes quite tricky, right? Because the politicians are going to say what they need to say to get elected.
Sure.
Right. And so, it's very challenging thing, and I think that's why, and that's like a perpetual thing with politicians, is that you never actually know what they truly believe. That's kind of what I started, right? You actually don't know what they believe. They say what they need to say to get elected.
So I think it's often said that all politics is local, and I think that there's a lot of truth to that, in that right now I think what the pro-life movement needs to do is obviously continue to pray, but educate. Yeah. Educate, because I was kind of flabbergasted. Around the last March for Life back in January, we had a youth group night about pro-life, and our youth group is mostly public school kids and actually mostly unchurched kids. So it was kind of an interesting dynamic, and I was really expecting tons of pushback, and I got none.
Wow.
The kids were like, oh, that's really interesting. Like, I didn't know that that's what an abortion was, and that's why it's bad. Okay, I agree. And I was like, oh, wow. Like, I just gave them like rational arguments, and they agreed with me.
Yeah.
Because all they're hearing from the media is women's rights. So if we focus as pro-lifers on education as to what really is an abortion,
right,
what is the human person, that it starts at conception, and then that's worth preserving and sacrificing for.
Yeah, So maybe just to finish my point, we can move on. But I would say that my prediction is that in the next 10 to 15 years, the abortion argument in the political sphere will actually disappear. And maybe it shouldn't. I'm not saying that's a good thing. So just for the record.
I don't know.
But I would say that it's going to disappear, where it just won't be spoken of, because if the parties agree, there's nothing to talk about. But that actually gives us quite an opportunity, right? Because if it's not on CNN every day, if it's not on Fox News every day, that actually allows the pro-life movement to then do real work on the ground
and control the
without
narrative,
the political ramifications of it, which is a good thing, because we don't want, as Joe said, we don't want the pro-life movement and a party to be commingled necessarily.
Yeah, but people thought after Roe versus Wade was passed that it would fall out of public consciousness, or after Dobbs was passed. It's like, okay, it's settled. It's not settled. It hasn't been settled in 55 years.
Right. But,
Go ahead, Joe. Okay. Sorry.
No, it's fine. A couple of things. I agree with the points you guys are making, that the real work on the ground level, that's always been true. It's never primarily a political thing. What Roe did is it froze the politics of abortion. Paul said this earlier. It prevented the legislation on abortion, which means it also really prevented substantive political discussion, because it was discussion without any possible effect. So I don't. We're unsettled now, as we were with passing of Roe, but in a different way, because now there are potential consequences to what people say about abortion, which means that Republicans aren't going to come out here. And it's worth noting, by the way, how flat-footed all of the Republican states were. I mean, there was no state that was ready for the thing they say that we say we've been striving for decades.
Well, there were a lot of
No,
there were a lot of
states
trigger
that came
laws.
out. There was a lot
there
of
were
states.
trigger laws. There were trigger laws that nobody was willing to defend. That's my point. There's nobody who had actually thought through. No legislative body had actually thought through in a systematic way what they were willing to defend if they actually had to. That's my point. Because if you watch these trigger laws, one by one they start falling because of the courts, but also because of referenda and because Republicans themselves oftentimes have changed them. I would just say that there are elected Republicans who are serious about abortion still, who are seriously against abortion, and it's just this is the same thing to me as when people say all politicians are liars. Because when you say all politicians are liars, then when Kamala and Trump come out here and they lie just with incredible abandon, it makes it all the same thing. It's also not the case. Just like that's not true. There are more honest politicians than others. There are politicians who are if not perfectly consistently pro-life, authentically pro-life, and more,
Yeah.
maybe even in an incremental way with which we might be personally uncomfortable. But being incrementally pro-life is substantively different and significantly better than being actively pro-choice or just totally abandoning the issue and saying, I really don't care what happens, honestly, like, pass your ban on partial birth abortion and get out of my way. Those are totally different things. Totally different
Yeah,
things. We can't, if we find it out, then we lose the argument.
Joe, my point is that it's very hard to as just an individual, we actually don't have the ability to actually suss that out though. Right. And when you think of because you can only hear what they say and read what they write. But
you
you're
also can
right.
see what they do.
Hold up. But you're right
You can also
though.
see what they do.
You could see what they do, and I think that's where you can see it more. But let's see. I would say that I guess my confidence in Republican politicians and their pro-life stances was challenged and continues to disappoint. And so I don't think that we can rely on the past to to determine the future for this. It's like when you open a brokerage account, past performance is not indicative of future performance, and it's true in this case because the playing field is different. So I would just be careful. I think we have to be careful when we kind of say that there's people that are truly pro-life and they do this and this. I've lost confidence in that.
Well, yeah, okay, fine, but like after Dobbs came out, Ron DeSantis, I have plenty of other disagreements with him, but did actually try to pass a serious abortion restriction, which Trump opposed and said don't vote for. So again, the way he's seeing here a substantive difference. So it's one thing to go out on the campaign trail and say I'm in favor of giving giving a unicorn in every pot type thing, right? But like once it actually comes down to your political future on the line, and you're willing to say, here's my actual position: abortion's not after 6 weeks, and then you're gonna run on that. Okay, I trust that person a lot more because you've put some skin in the game here, right? So it's just again, it's different. It's just different. And I don't think we can pretend we don't have that evidence. We have it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I would like to see. I actually haven't seen this, but I'd like to see a study of the folks that were 100%. And this is a bad thing. It's not good. I hope we can all agree on this. The folks that said that they'd be, completely, against abortion in all circumstances, that now are saying, well, I'll vote for a 6-week. And maybe because the option is 12-week and 6-week. And that's
it's worth saying, like, if the option is if you're in a state, right, and you have somehow magically have the choice between referenda, like it might be worth as a strategic matter voting for a more permissive abortion restriction, right? Because it might actually like survive constitutional challenge, might survive, attempts to overturn it. It's like there's an incrementalism which I think is prudent and appropriate. That's different from this total abandonment of the principle.
Yeah,
and
you're
there are people
absolutely
choosing
right.
sides in that debate. It's worth paying attention to who lands on which side of that debate in terms of politicians.
Yeah, no, it's true. But like I said, I think that my prediction is that it will be abandoned, and I think that actually not, and it shouldn't be necessarily, but it will be abandoned, and then we have real work to do on the pro-life movement.
Yeah. So we're stuck between two candidates, one who perhaps is a lot more vocal in their pro-choice stance, and one who has done and said things that are very pro-choice, but has also done and said things that are pro-life. So we have kind of that. So I mean, we've talked about the economy. What other issues are people really kind of concerned about right now? Economy, immigration.
Yeah,
There's one issue that. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to talk about the economy for a second.
Okay, just very briefly before we get to the economy.
Yeah.
The one issue a lot of people are worried about, what they should stop being worrying about, and they will stop being worried about after I say this. Hopefully, many people say things like, well, sure, everything you're saying about Trump's moral failings or whatever are true, but this election is so important. It might be the last election of my lifetime. It's the whole republic's on the line here. The whole system collapses if Kamala becomes president. No, 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 no.
Well,
That's not
I
true.
might
There's
die
there's zero,
on
literally
November
zero,
6th.
there's literally zero reason. Yeah,
Which
okay.
case-
Other than
which-
that,
Other than your death.
there's zero reason to think that Kamala Harris is somehow an existential threat to the Republican order of this country, such that if you don't vote for Trump and he's not elected, then all of our rights are out the window and the churches will be shuttered. It's so stupid. It's so not true.
Yeah.
In fact, it's not only is it not true, but it's probably the opposite. So just
I-
let me
my-
just
my
that
biggest-
shouldn't be a consideration. You think this is the last election or anything nonsense like that. It's
Right.
so not true.
The,
It's
the
so
bigger
poisonous.
the bigger thing about with particularly about the Trump who wins the presidency is that there's a lot of down ballot races right now, which are in the Senate, which actually have a bigger impact on the policy making of this country, that will swing one way or the other based on down ballot voting. Because a lot of states still have straight ticket voting, where you literally check a box Republican, and that means you vote for all the Republicans. We don't have that in Connecticut, and so that's. So I would say that the presidency is still like important, because if it does go one way or the other, that probably will determine the outlook for the Congress. I will say one thing that's just that both parties have been terrible at, even though one party, I mean, the Republican Party has said that we have to get government spending under control and we have to balance the budget. The Democrats say we have to balance the budget, and they say we have to do that by increasing taxes. But at the end of the day, no party is saying what needs to be done on the economic side, which is severe austerity measures across the board. And no one wants to talk about it because it's painful. But we've gotten ourselves into a situation now, which is something which we're not there yet, because the U.S. still is a petrodollar, it still is a very powerful economy. We're still the largest economy in the world. We still have the #1 currency in the world.
Are we the largest economy in the world?
We are. Yeah, we're still bigger than China.
Bigger than China? Are we bigger than
Yeah.
China? Okay.
Oh, by a lot, by far. And our GDP per capita is like way bigger than China. We're still one of the top countries on GDP per capita, which is crazy because we have 340 million people.
Yeah.
So, we're a very strong economy. So I don't want to discount that. We're not like Argentina, but there will be a time when there will have to be draconian austerity measures in this country, and that's that's at a time probably, and it's going to be in the future. It will be. I don't know when, but it will be, and it will be at a very bad time. And so we as a country have to decide, and this is also gets down to a life issue, because the economy does affect people's lives, whether we like it or not. We have to decide if are we going to start tightening our belt now or when it's worse, because we actually have a good economy right now. We are still the petrodollar. We still have the best innovation in the world. We still have one of the biggest manufacturing economies in the world, even though it's like not as big as China, but it's still a very large manufacturing economy. We have all these things now, and I'm worried that 50 years down the line, hopefully I'll still be alive, that those things won't be the case, and then we'll have to go through austerity. And so that's the big thing, is are we willing to start tightening the belt now? Major Medicare reform, major Social Security reform.
Yeah, good luck with
Unfortunately,
that.
the answer to that question is no, we're not willing to do that.
We're
now.
not willing to do
We're
it.
not willing
And
to do
so
that now,
then,
because the
you know,
last
we're
person
still-
that he wanted to do it was Paul Ryan, and nobody's heard from him since.
And we're still going to accrue $2 trillion every year of new debt.
Right.
Yeah.
And eventually it's not going to work.
And this is
It
like
probably
both
could work
candidates-
for another
yeah.
20 years, to be honest. It probably can work for another 20 years.
Well, I mean, the Democratic Party has been known for handouts and big government spending, right? Unfortunately, the Republicans have not shown really much restraint in that either. So, although typically they profess it, whether or not they do it is
Yeah, I
another
mean, each
matter, but-
administration has been worse on spending than the last. I mean, Trump was worse than
incredible.
Obama.
'Cause it's actually-
Biden's
it's easy-
worse than
and-
Trump.
And it's easy to spend money, right? It's easy to spend money.
It's easy to
like
print money.
You rack up a credit card that then you hand to, like, I spend a bunch of money and then I send the bill to you. And it's like, and then you have to
really
pay
to your
for it.
grandchildren, but yeah.
But that's the thing is that we're not yet paying for it.
We're not. No.
We're not, and
No.
at some
but
point
the-
it will
the
come
first-
due. But
The frustrating thing is we actually can, right? So
Right.
the problem with it is that this is probably too economic-y, but like it's just an increase or a decrease in the money supply, right? Like when you tax, you're just decreasing the money supply because it's all just numbers anyway. It's not like the government's like literally printing money, right? Like
it's not a thing.
The taxation just reduces the money supply, but you can't just reduce the money supply by taxation. You actually have to reduce the money supply by stopping the spending.
Yes,
And that's just like, and it's all just numbers, and that's why this like modern monetary theory is like, well, it's all just numbers, and it just accrues, and it just accrues and accrues, and no,
That's
you
what
never
people
have to
came
pay.
for is modern monetary theory commentary.
Right.
This is why the people come.
That's I'll tell you. It's riveting. You sit on the edge of your seat.
No,
But
but
it's a
true,
real
but
issue, yeah.
it's a real issue, and I think
I think, yeah.
and I think,
But that's and the hard thing about that is that it has to be a total change of worldview and a change of virtue, really.
Yeah,
because
for
you have
sure.
to have the virtue as a nation to say prosperity is going to look a little different in the future, and it's not going to look like I'm going to get everything I possibly want. And I think a symptom of that has been like Biden's idea of trying to cancel the debt of all these college students, because there's this view that now I can rack up $100,000 in debt and the government will just take care of it, so I get a free ride, or whatever, a free ride. It's the handout mentality, but that's a mental shift of saying, no, I'm going to be responsible for the debt I take on. I'm going to be responsible for, for my own
right.
well-being.
Yeah, and I think we have a moral obligation. And talk about moral obligation, like we want people to have agency over their lives, like because we have free will, and we need to enable that free will and have agency over lives. When you start having handouts and welfare programs, it traps people, it imprisons people, just like how people might get imprisoned by their sin. I'm not saying it's equivalent, but it's similar because you get attached to it, and it's hard to give it up.
Very much so. Very much so.
Yeah, I think Paul, you draw out a really important point, which is that we tend to think of all elections and all politics on a single axis, which is, to what extent does this candidate's stated positions align with mine, right? But there's actually, we can chart another axis, which is like, how competent are they to actually do the job, and how serious are they about governing? And so you have a lot of people who say the right things, sort of quote unquote, in debates about anything, about abortion, about immigration, about balancing the budget, but they don't actually have the competency, literally have the skills of governing, and B, they don't actually think governing is serious business. So. Again, like I'm not like endorsing him for anything. I just think he's an interesting case study. If you look at somebody like Paul Ryan, right, like his two big issues were autonomy reform and poverty reduction, right? He would do the math, right? He actually had serious, concrete suggestions, not postcards, not YouTube videos, actual suggestions on how to actually accomplish actual policy people actually might want. That's a serious vision of governing that is totally absent from this election and from the last one and from before that. This is not fundamentally a policy election, because fundamentally neither of these candidates really believe anything or have expressed any. But Kamala Harris has basically said nothing about what she actually would do. Trump's had every position, every issue. So people aren't voting for either of these candidates out of policy, even no matter what they tell themselves. Right. So I think that what we need to turn back to is a politics governed by the virtue of prudence, which I think was something Paul was saying here, like, who's actually serious about the business of governing? You know what I mean?
In a democracy, that implies that we as citizens value that virtue and want to practice it in our own lives. Because
that's my point, though.
Great Greek philosopher said, in a democracy, you get the kind of leaders that you deserve. So we can't blame the divine right of kings. We can't blame, we just got bad luck with a dictator. No, we blame ourselves. It's us.
That's my point, though. Yeah,
you're right. You're absolutely right. Yeah. And that's why when I look at politics, I think so many people think politics are going to save the world, and especially in the last election. I was at a really wonderful parish, St. John's Basilica, but there were a lot of people there who actually got mad at me for not endorsing Trump. I didn't endorse anybody. I was just not going to do that. But they're like Trump's going to save America. I'm like, no, he's not, because America has deeper problems than who's sitting in the White House. I mean, he's a factor, but the problem is with the people, and that's why I'm a priest, because I believe that it's only when we are changed by God's grace and His mercy that the nation will change.
Right.
As St. Augustine said, we complain about the times, but we are the times.
Yep. Well, one positive thing, maybe we can end here, but is that the people that are really only having babies right now are like Catholics, Orthodox Jews, and Mormons.
That's another issue that never gets talked about, is the coming demographic collapse.
Right. But
it's going to be a big issue.
But if you fast forward, if those are the only people having babies, then, maybe there's some hope.
Playing the long game out here.
Very long game,
200 years, Hey, the church is older. It's only 10% of the church's history.
And that is a good perspective that, we tend to think of, 4 years is like the most critical time. But it is. It's a long slog through history, and God's in charge. And we just put out a couple episodes about God's providence through history. And if we can see His providence in the past, we can trust that whoever takes the place in the White House, it may not be God's direct active will that this candidate gets elected, but God can use them, even corrupt people, as He used Cyrus in to let the Jews go out of Babylon and pagan kings. So we got to have the hope and trust, and I hear a lot from my parishioners. In fact, one of the things that gets most confessed now is people's anger towards politics.
Oh,
They
interesting.
sit there and they watch CNN and they yell and they lose their peace. And I'm always like, seriously? Like, I guess I've never yelled at TV ever. Maybe when the Orioles lose, but that's about it.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
but why are we getting upset? Do we really think that politics is that important?
It's a lack of agency, right?
Yeah.
Where you feel like things are spiraling out of control and you don't like where they're going and you can do nothing about it. And when you lose control over something that you think you should have, like it's a democracy, right? Power
Right.
to the people. And if you see it continually spiraling out of control and you as a person who is part of the people don't see it, that is irritating.
Yeah.
Right? Now, that's okay. That's an emotion. We can handle that. Now, anger is like to let it get to you. And the way you kind of handle that, that's what can be addressed. But the baseline sort of like, emotion, I don't think that's necessarily misguided.
Yeah.
But maybe the energy needs to be redirected.
Right, because
Something like
and even Aquinas says, anger is not in itself a bad emotion. It's an emotion that can spur you on to justice, which is good. So if this anger says, all right, I'm going to pray even harder, the rosary every day for this country, great, praise God. That's what it should be. Or I'm going to do, education on a local level. I'm going to write letters to senator, whatever it's spurring you on to, but not something that causes you to lose your peace.
Yeah. Yeah. Great.
Yeah, I certainly agree with all of that. I think that the anger at politics is a lot of sources, right? I mean, people's ability to discern, people's news literacy, right? Typically very low, frankly. So there's all sorts of issues that contribute to this, not knowing how to discern one thing from another. But I think to underscore your point, Father, right? Like, politics are not our salvation, and ultimately we're not electing like a savior. We're electing a bureaucrat, essentially. Not exactly, but in essence. And so, yeah, I think just like a healthy detachment of like, this is not the end of the world. This is not the end of my life. It's serious and it matters. But also, like, if they're not going to take it seriously, why should any of you? I mean, frankly, like, none of these two people don't.
It's a reality
care about
TV show.
you. They don't care about you. They don't care about
That's what we
governing.
like to watch.
They care about the office. They don't know anything. They don't have any. So like, I mean, seriously, don't let it stress you out because they're not. I mean, like, focus on your prayer life and focus on your church community. You know what I mean? Like, at least you can take that seriously.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. You may want to wrap it up now. I've lots more questions to ask, but you probably want to.
Well, yeah, I think we're about double our time,
We are.
the general allotment here, but that's
I mean,
okay.
it's
Joe
one of
had a
those
lot
things
of
you have to either
important
hit
things to
exactly
say.
double, or you have to. Well, Paul, you have a lot of misconceptions that need to be cleared up. So I'm glad we
I
had
didn't say
time to
any.
do it.
I think we agree.
I think you guys
more than
agree.
we
Actually,
normally do.
yeah,
We do agree.
that's not too much.
They
we
say
disagree on.
the smaller the stakes, the bigger the knives. It's like Paul and I agree a lot, but not nearly enough. you know?
Well, it's just because you should just agree with me more.
Yeah.
But to
That's
sum up,
definitely
then,
a point of view.
to sum up, right? We as Catholics have a kind of soft obligation to vote, right? I would not go so far as to say it's a moral sin in any way, shape, or form to not vote if that's your prudential judgment. But I think it is better to vote because that's the virtue of patriotism, which is a great virtue in today's world, often forgotten.
Love of one country.
Love of one's country, right? Exactly. And in loving our country, we should make our voice heard. At the same time, respecting the fact that we have two candidates, both of whom are flawed not only in their personal life but also in their policies. It does make it difficult for a Catholic, and I think Catholics have the freedom to either choose the one that they consider the lesser of two evils, or to choose a third option, because that's not the only two options that are out there. So, as a Catholic, it is a tough election, but as a Catholic, we've also seen despots and tyrants come and go in 2,000 years, and we'll outlive whoever takes the Oval Office in November,
Right.
in January,
Right.
whenever. Yeah.
January.
Thank you. Well, thank you for joining us in this episode of Restless. You can find us on Veritas Catholic Network, 1350 AM, and also YouTube and Spotify and iTunes and all kinds of other great places where you should download all the rest of our other 200 plus episodes talking about every aspect of life under the sun from the perspective of young adult Catholics. And tune in next time to Joe, Paul, and Father Joseph for our next Restless episode. God bless you.